All right, so we're here at DevOps Day Austin. We're bringing the band back together. It's me and Michael Cote, the
Hello.
IT management guys. So, you having a good time here, buddy?
Absolutely. I especially like being close to the food here. It's always a very comforting thing.
And I think right as soon as we're done, lunch will be ready. So
I had 3 breakfast tacos, though, so I don't know if I really need anything. But, it's always a challenge to have more.
So we've been talking about getting our podcast series back together. But
Sure.
I've been working with Gene on the IT Revolution, the DevOps Cookbook, and the novel When IT Fails. But one of the things,
like fiction novel, you mean?
Fiction, yeah,
okay.
Yeah. This is
sort of like going back to like the goal or something.
It is, yeah.
Nice.
That's exactly what it is.
You're gonna have a Cub Scout troop marching around or something, trying to explain flow.
The herpes. You remember Herbie? He was the heavyweight kid that.
Oh, that's right. He was holding everyone up, right?
Theory of constraints, my friend.
Yeah. Theory of constraints. Get the factory going. And what's up with that professor? How come he can't just answer a direct question?
Yeah, really, Jonah. Yeah, no kidding.
It's very annoying. Who has time for that?
So who is the DevOps Jonah?
Who is the DevOps Jonah? I don't know. Andrew Schaefer?
Oh, yeah, there you go. You're right. Andrew Schaefer is the DevOps Jonah. Right. So, no, well, we'll see. I wonder what role I would play.
I don't remember all the characters that well. I know there was the GM of the factory. He had a wife. There was his kid.
Fighting and shit. Yeah.
And then there was the unhelpful professor, and there probably was an antagonist in his team. It was like, no, we can't do that.
That had to be me.
I don't even remember what they were building. It's kind of quaint to think of that. I always like
robots.
He was friendly robots.
The Jonah and the robots.
I like the name of his second book, which maybe is a little forecasting for DevOps. I think it was called It's Not Luck.
So now we digress.
Yes.
All right.
Sorry.
So we've done this many times before, digress. Normally we talk about food, right?
Yes. But somehow we got into a theory of constraints of early 80s business fictionalization.
Wait, so speaking of food, how was lunch? No, all right, let's get to it. So Michael did an awesome presentation yesterday. I mean, I'm always a fan of Michael going way back. But yesterday he kind of blew me away because his presentation, it was really, to me, we talk a lot about the definitions of DevOps, or what DevOps are, what are these patterns that we're looking for. And one of the things that is hard is that we all we can show is good examples, and most of our examples are web operations. And so what Michael tried to attack yesterday is trying to kind of, for the first time I've seen, really put in place, tackle patterns for the enterprise. And he used the crowbar experience at Dell. And so I loosely was talking to Michael this morning about this idea that I don't want to call things manifestos, but it really did kind of give me the chills about what could be some nice pattern definitions when we're trying to explain DevOps to the enterprise. So.
Well, I appreciate your compliments.
Yeah. So let's start with the first thing, because there's always this argument about we don't have a definition of DevOps. How can anybody explain it? And to me, I'm always fascinated by the people who walk into a DevOps conversation and snap get it, and then the people who walk into a DevOps conversation and are asking for definitions and why don't we call it something else? And you said something yesterday what I think was awesome, which is there are 2 types of people in the world: people who get DevOps and people who don't.
And that's. So, I mean, to set a little bit of context, I mean, I think in looking at a phenomenon like DevOps, the important thing to keep in mind is that it's a very new phenomenon, right? And there's different ways of thinking about how you introduce some process or culture or technology depending on how old it is. And the older it is, the more static and the easier it is, and the more you don't get into hyperbolic phrases like this. So, with that context, at this point in DevOps life, it seems like there's not really much a barbell. There's not that much in between. People either instantly get that, it lets me do more stuff faster, or whatever. I'm sure we could get into some lengthy debate about what it is, but to me, DevOps is about we just need to get more code out the door more frequently, and I help you do
the
that.
Business, right?
Yeah. And as we've talked about in the past, right? I mean, you and I are sort of we definitely went through the business service management ringer of the late 90s and early 2000s, which was IT being told, you got to stop screwing around with these computers and remember that you're actually trying to support the business. The business could give a crap about what IT is doing. So just make sure that whatever it is you're doing is helping the business sell more products, sell more services, retain more customers, grow accounts, get more money, right? Or save money. And So in that sense, like DevOps is it's very pure in that sense, in that it really is targeting the end result of IT and not just over-rotating on like, ooh, we got a big server. Or, like, it's not really IT for IT's sake, which is exciting. So, I mean, back to this one bullet point. I mean, it really is, at this point, you either kind of get that it improves the way IT can support the business, or you don't. And it's kind of not worth your time to proselytize to the people who don't get it. Okay, and you kind of have to cut yourself off.
I think that was the kind of next bullet, which was, I get frustrated because people, really smart people, will come to me, and it's the people that are kind of fighting it, and I'm like, why fight it? Embrace it. But then you run into this, well, other people tell you, well, you have to be better at explaining it to them because they're getting frustrated, and it's not good for this movement.
And that's one of the themes that runs through a lot of the items that I was going over, and as longtime listeners of our podcast, and you well know, right? Like, I'm always comparing to the past. So I'm always comparing DevOps to Agile and Cloud to Agile, because Agile was a phenomenon that
What is Agile again?
That's right. It's one of the few phenomena that I've now am old enough that in my professional life it didn't exist when I started, and it kind of crested and reached the plateau of boringness, sometime in the past of my life. So I've seen the full cycle of Agile applying. No, I hope not. But I don't know what that means, but it might be fun to do. Okay. But so, and so in comparison to that, like I remember the first time I encountered Agile was we were here in town, and one of my friends, Charles, from the Drunken Retired podcast, he was working for ThoughtWorks, and he just had started working there, and one of the things they issued in 99, or I forget when the date was, maybe 2000, maybe a little later, was they gave him a copy of Kent Beck's XP book, right? And so he was telling us about all these wonderful things in XP, like pair programming, and week-long, they didn't call them sprints then, but very small iterations and all these things. And that all sounded insane. And most people still think pair programming is insane. But it was interesting. So pulling back from that, what you saw in that era is people would debate doing Agile versus RUP at the time, the Rational Unified Process, or Waterfall, as it kind of got backhandedly shorthanded to. And they would argue endlessly with people about if it was good or bad. But sooner or later, what the Agile community learned was like, I'm wasting my time if I'm trying to convert you, because what I should be doing is working on my stuff. And it wasn't so much that, like, and this is what we were talking about this earlier, like, it wasn't so much that they were saying we don't need to define Agile, or we don't need to do this, or like, it was more like, we know what it is and we're going to go do it. And then as time progressed, like, you can almost, it would be interesting to make a timeline of books that came out with Agile. I don't really know how this happens nowadays, but back then books were the milestones of the community.
Today's blogs, right?
Like, in my day.
Yeah, back in the day.
When we ate dirt and we loved it.
We had to walk 40 miles.
So you had
a computer.
You had like the XP book came out, and before that was like Ward Cunningham's, like, what was it, his C3 wiki. So that was like kind of the stage of DevOps is in now, is like just sort of like endless chatter from the random elite masses talking about stuff, and then it coalesced into the XP book, and then around that time, like, Alexander Coburn, he like wrote a whole bunch of books and kind of got religion, as it were. And I forget when Scrum came out, but in my mind, those are the two major bookends of, literally, I guess, of Agile, which I'm thinking DevOps will turn out this way, right? It's like you had Scrum, whole bunch of crap in the middle. I mean, you had XP, whole bunch of crap in the middle, and then Scrum comes along. And then once Scrum comes out, it's more or less codified, and everything just kind of flows out of there. And then that's when, like, eventually people go all like lean crazy, and like all the big people come in and have their own way of doing it. But the point there is that there probably was a lot of discussion in the Agile world about we need to have a definition or whatever, but like it was really sort of like, we do have a definition, and if you don't like it, we'll see you in a few years.
That's my, I mean, I'm tired of having to defend not having a definition. In fact, John Allspar, I did this recent on IT Revolution, a podcast called Convergence of DevOps, which is a short history of DevOps. And I was doing some fact checking, and I sent John Allspar an email about his 100 deploys at Flickr. I wanted to see if he had worked with Eric Ries or independent. He was independent, but he kind of did a follow-on on the email explaining his position on the definition of DevOps. And his point was exactly that we don't need to actually define it right now.
Yeah, or like, I mean, the snarky thing I'm trying to make the point of is like, you do have a definition.
Yeah,
right? So you have defined it.
That was what he said, was he used the Grace Hopper,
Yeah.
A bug, right?
Right.
A debug is part of software lexicon now, and had we waited 5 years to debate why that was a bad way to describe something weird, which had nothing to do, so it really is about the patterns. And that was the other bullet that you talked about. We've kind of already covered it, but the always be coding, and that, to me, that means always be, like you said, if you don't get it, just heads down. Just keep working on it. Keep blogging about it. Maybe blogging is, like the books. I mean, today I think with DevOps, the equivalent of DevOps or Agile books is canonical blog posts about DevOps.
Yeah, that's probably true.
And examples from companies that are like Wealthfront and Etsy, who are showing phenomenal success. But this idea of always be coding. Don't worry about it.
Well, unlock the screen here.
Uh-oh.
I've got precious corporate data on here, so it's a very
Windows, guys.
very protected computer.
Yeah.
There we go.
He works for the man now. So the always be coding to me just meant, I tweeted this out yesterday, it's just, what it means is just, put your head down and work on DevOps.
Yeah.
And then that you do, it's almost like, not to get religious, but, I think when you talk to people who are Christians, they'll say, just show your behavior of how you are.
Yeah.
People will be more likely.
And to use another agile callback, right, to be the old fogey. Like, if you talk with someone like Israel Gatt, who, like, I was lucky to be at BMC when he came in as the vice president of that unit, and top down, he wouldn't say forced, but forced us to use agile or encouraged us. And, one of the things that he would say and that he did was that he didn't really worry about defining agile or explaining it to people or getting buy-in. He just found a couple of small little teams and had them do agile, and then like they were successful, so it was like, do that. I mean, like, it worked for them. It's a successful process. So we don't really need to think that much ahead of time. We've proven that it works. And that's kind of the point there, is like, you don't want to spend too much time. Navel gazing is the snarky way of putting it, because it's incorrect. But you don't want to spend too much time analyzing what you're doing. Like, you just want to do something and try it out.
And it will show. It's either the goodness of it is going to show.
And then hopefully, like, what you can do is, once you get success there, instead of having to point people to only a definition, you also point them to people who are successful at it. I mean, this is why I'm always, as you were kind of alluding to, I'm always on the quest for for unexceptional companies, right? Like companies that aren't like
the ones that you wouldn't figure.
Just and I say this without being judgmental, but just boring normal companies. Like, what are they doing?
They are boring. let's call them what they are. No, so I mean that was the other point, like that referenceable.
Right.
When we can point to, like, I don't get, like I always say, we've had this conversation on times about cloud. Like, early as a cloud, people would say, well, explain it to me. I explain it, like, I don't get it. And I'm like, well, I know one when I see one.
Sure.
And that's, to me, that's, I know one when I see one. Like, I can tell you it on Blue and Face, or go read Etsy's blog.
Yeah.
And see what they're engineering. Go look at Wealthfront. And I think hopefully what we'll see is some large enterprises, have these examples.
Sure.
And we can point to, because then the first question is, well, how do you do in the enterprise? Bang. And I think the one other thing I thought was cool, the whole presentation was awesome, but the one other thing I love too is this whole idea of pulling, not pushing.
Right.
And it's funny, as I learn more and try to influence lean, big part of that. I'm not an old school lean guy, right? So I'm reading all these lean books now, and working with Gene actually has got me into a lot more knowledge about lean, and like, if you could define lean to me, and there's a million ways to say lean, but if you put a gun to my head, I'd say it's pull, not push, right?
Right.
And now what's beauty about that is I watch those patterns everywhere I go. Even while you were talking yesterday, I was thinking, you know what? A bad pattern and an anti-pattern for DevOps is email in a lot of cases, because it's a push, not pull. But so when you talked about that, I immediately thought it's a great way to influence DevOps, in that what you're looking for is setting yourself up as a shaman or somebody who represents information, so people come to you. Yeah,
it's always better to have someone invite you to come talk about something than to have to go convince them that what you have to say is worth their time. And that's, especially in like a large company, you're almost trained, not at a company, but just in our white collar culture, that the way you succeed is by showing up and being vocal, right? Like I'm sure everyone's had that experience with someone saying, like, whenever you're in a meeting, it's very important that you speak up and say something. so that you're noticed.
I never had
And
that problem.
right, and that's sort of like in a big company there is this mentality of the way I'm rewarded and the way I succeed is by people realizing that I'm here,
How many
right?
people can I crush today?
Yeah, and that's, I mean, it's one, it wastes a lot of time because people are gratuitously talking, and two, whenever you're talking, you're not working, right? Like, you could be actually doing something that instead of having to talk about it, you just say, like, here's what I did, right? Like, and here's an example of doing it, and especially in this DevOps space, right? Like, it's just so important this early in the industry to actually get something out, to ship something, whether you're working on a product, which is mostly what I was going over, or it's like a project that you're working on. You just need to show success, and you're never going to explain success. You can only have it.
And I think that's the moral of the story is that we, instead of we have these kind of two types of people in the world. What we really need to be doing is getting our heads down and showing success, not explaining success.
Yeah, and early on, there's maybe you don't need to do that so much, but I think at this point in DevOps' life, it really is time for all those boring case studies and reference things. And I mean, I'm putting it in the boring way. But it is like, you just need some marketing. I mean, this is a large part of what early stage marketing does, is it shows off all the success that you've had so far.
Totally. Well, this has been brought to you live from the cafeteria at National Insurance. DevOps Days, Austin. Thank you.
So long.